Okay, let's unpack this. We're opening a massive geographical file today, focusing on a region that's, well, it's so crucial to global history.
It really is.
We're talking about this vast triangle of Asia stretching from the Indian subcontinent right across China and down into Southeast Asia.
And it's a region whose internal connectivity is, I think, very rarely appreciated.
Exactly.
So we're doing a deep dive into these massive river systems of Asia. And our sources, especially some of the historical research on this network, they reveal a really surprising story.
And what's that?
Well, these aren't just waterways that flow through empires. The core argument here is that the rivers themselves, their physical dynamics, they actively resisted, they shaped, and, they often just flat out defeated the ambitions of the world's most powerful states.
You're talking about the British, the French, the Qing dynasty.
All of them.
That is a powerful place to start. It's like the river itself has agency.
It does.
So we're looking at the 19th and early 20th centuries. This is peak imperial expansion, right? They're trying to impose order and, well, extract value from this place that seems completely untamable.
Right. So our mission today is to really get a handle on the geography and, critically, the incredible local ingenuity that allowed this whole colossal system to function as a single, interconnected fluvial commons.
A commons. So a shared space.
Exactly. We need to trace how power and people and trade flowed across a region that's defined by some of the most impenetrable mountains on Earth.
And by viciously competing empires.
And what the sources show is that the real connectivity, the real flow, it was driven by geography, by necessity, and by local actors. It was not some grand design from London or Paris or Beijing.
Okay, so we're talking about six giants of the fluvial world. You've grouped them with an acronym, BMRY.
That's right. It's the Brahmaputra, Irrawaddy, Salween, Mekong, Red, and the Yangzi rivers.
It's important to get the scope right away. This whole system, even though it flows into completely different oceans and seas, it all starts in one place, doesn't it?
That's the first geographical miracle, really. It all comes from the Tibetan plateau. We often call it the third pole.
Because it holds the largest concentration of fresh water outside the polar regions.
Precisely. It's this colossal, high-altitude factory of water that is the launch pad for at least 13 major river systems, including all of our Bismarck rivers, and it sustains, nearly a third of humanity.
Incredible. So if this is one cohesive system, how do the sources establish that these rivers operated as boundless sites of the commons? How did that work in practice right in the middle of this imperial land grab?
The sources break it down into three critical threads, and they're all interwoven.
Okay.
The first one deals with imperial limitations. So you have these competing powers, British, French, King China, and they all want absolute monopolistic control over a river artery. But they were consistently checked.
By the geography.
By the geography. The sheer physical constraints. I mean, brutal rapids, impossible terrain, these massive gorges. It was just too much for them.
So the landscape itself limited their ability to create a monopoly. It forced them into this kind of uncomfortable, maybe unofficial sharing and negotiation just to keep trade moving at all.
That's it, exactly. They couldn't conquer the terrain, so they were forced to compromise. The rivers became shared zones almost by default.
Okay, that's thread number one. What's the second?
The second is local resistance and negotiation. So when empires tried to tame these networks, they hit two walls at once: the topography and the fierce organized resistance of ethnic groups.
Like the Kachins in Burma or the Abors, the Adyadi in India's northeast?
The very same. And this is the key point. This resistance wasn't just about isolation. We have this image of autonomous highland societies just fleeing the state, right?
Yeah, hiding out in the mountains.
But this argument flips that script. These groups weren't just fleeing. They were actively managing their engagement with the outside world.
So they resisted political control.
They resisted imperial settlement, political penetration, absolutely.
Right.
But they facilitated commercial flows, trade, goods, people, but only on their own terms.
So they're inviting the empires to play on their home ground.
That's a perfect way to put it. They ensured the flow continued, but in a way that benefited their local economy. The sources call it a rooted mobility. You're connected to the big oceanic flows, but you remain politically independent.
That distinction is so important. Rooted mobility, not isolation. And the third thread, that comes from the ground up, right?
Yes, the everyday entanglements. This is about the vast majority of people. Ordinary boaters, travelers, pilgrims, peddlers, smugglers, all mingling in what the authors call liminal spaces.
Marketplaces, trade towns, confluences.
Exactly. Places like marketplaces and the physical meeting points of rivers, the Sangama, and absolutely crucial to this, and we'll come back to it, was non-human agency.
You mean animals?
Pack animals, specifically mules, which blurred the lines between human and non-human labor and kept the whole thing connected where the water failed.
Okay, that is a fantastic framework. Let's dive deeper into that first part. The geographic unity of the Dizamara network. It all begins on the Tibetan plateau.
Right, the engine room. High, cold, the source for rivers that feed half the world. You've got the Indus, the Ganga, the Yellow River, and our whole Bismarck cluster.
It's hard to visualize that. How did people in the 19th century make sense of it?
There's a great analogy from the German geologist Ferdinand von Richthofen. He was analyzing this exact area.
And what did he say?
He described the long mountain ranges that stretch south from Tibet, the ranges that hold these rivers in these deep parallel trenches. He called them the fingers of the human hand.
Oh man, that's a great image.
It is, isn't it? The Bismarck rivers flow through them as a radial system. It captures this profound geological reality. These rivers are running side by side for hundreds of kilometers before they finally break away on their own journeys to the sea.
And the sources suggest the connection is even deeper than just proximity. There's a shared prehistory here.
There is. It's an active debate in paleogeology, but some theories suggest that 5 of these 6 rivers, the Brahmaputra, Irrawaddy, Salween, Mekong, and Yangzi, might have once all been tributaries of the Red River.
Wow.
And they only found their individual flows over millennia as the geology shifted. But whether that's fully proven or not, the sheer dramatic proximity today is what really matters for the history we're talking about.
And this is the crucial point for the listener. Where do they get so close you can almost touch them all?
We're looking squarely at Yunnan. That is the heart of this radial system. Around 28 degrees north, 98 degrees east, these massive rivers reach within arm's length of each other.
And what does that look like?
It's just a tangle of deep gorges. One traveler described it as looking like thunderbolts in the Kleshta Jove. Think of that image. 6 of the world's most powerful rivers almost braiding together before they explode outwards.
Which makes Yunnan this meganodal point. How did that geographical fact shape the culture and the economy?
You can't overstate Yunnan's role. The rivers spread out like a necklace around it, connecting South Asia, mainland Southeast Asia, and southwestern China. Every river had a journey to the ocean, yes, but it also had a journey toward Yunnan.
So it became this cosmopolitan transit hub.
It did. It was a spatial statement against the logic of these distant imperial centers, the Yellow Valley in China, or the Indus-Ganga Valley in India. It was the center of its own circular transregional flow.
And the sources bring in the Sanskrit concept, Sangama, to describe the cultural side of this.
Right, Sangama. It means the meeting of rivers, and it signifies these sites of profound mobility and cultural mixing. They often have spiritual significance, too. The authors suggest each Bismarck River was really a total of mini Sangama.
So where a major tributary met the main river, or where a river route met a land-based mule trail.
That's a Sangama. And the more of them you had, the more intense the flow of people and goods, the more cultural mixing you got.
Give us a sense of the scale of these nodal points. These hubs are where the commoning was most visible.
Absolutely. So you have to picture places like Bhamo on the Irrawaddy, Sirajganj and Siddhi on the Brahmaputra, Luang Prabang on the Mekong, Manhao on the Red River, and then huge cities like Wuhan and Chongqing on the Yangzi. These weren't just ports, they were massive cosmopolitan marketplaces built on this constant flow.
And all this proximity, it must have created chaos for the people trying to map it, right? For the empires.
Immense cartographical confusion.
Yeah.
I mean, even for experienced surveyors, the headwaters are so tangled that as late as the turn of the 20th century, people weren't sure. There was a debate about whether the Irrawaddy and the Brahmaputra were actually the same river in their upper reaches.
Seriously.
And even more remarkably, people were still arguing about whether a major river called Nagchu Ka fed the Salween, the Mekong, or the Yangzi. That's how closely interwoven they were. And that topographical closeness is what forced this translocal bonding and kept the whole area cohesive.
That geography gives us the stage. Now let's move to section 2. Imperial dreams and fluvial constraints. We'll walk through the rivers and see how this geography foiled the empires. Let's start with the Brahmaputra, the son of Brahma.
The Brahmaputra is really where the British China dream began. In 1765, the cartographer James Rennell, he's surveying the Ganga, and he makes this critical discovery.
Which was?
He realizes the massive Brahmaputra flows into the Bay of Bengal, and crucially, its northern end is surprisingly close to Yunnan. just 200 miles away.
And that immediately suggests a trade route.
The shortest, most commercially viable route between the heart of British India and the vast markets of China.
A century of frustrated ambition starts right there. But downstream, where did this potential turn into massive commercial reality?
Well, down in the delta, where it meets the Ganga, you had Golundo, a major hub, but just upstream was Sirajganj, and it just exploded. By 1870, the commercial vibrancy there was staggering. We're talking about annual transactions reaching at least £3 million sterling.
£3 million in 1870, that's an astronomical figure. What did Sirajganj even look like?
A viceroy, Richard Temple, called it a floating city. It was serviced by about 50,000 registered boats in 1877.
50,000 boats.
A constantly shifting population of tens of thousands of boatmen, workers, merchants. You had Marwaris from Rajasthan, Bengalis, Europeans, traders from as far away as Baghdad, all mingling. It just completely overturns the image of the colonial river being dominated by the British steamer.
So the British wanted to use this immense economic gravity to push upstream to Sadia, their gateway to China. How did Sadia function?
Sadia was the end of the line for river navigation and the jumping-off point for the land routes into the mountains. It was the bridgehead for Tibetan, Chinese, and Burmese trade.
How did it connect?
Specifically, it connected to Lhasa via the Manas River, and up the Lohit River, it linked to Rima, which then connected directly to Wolong, Batang, and Lijiang on the Yangzi.
So there was already a functioning international trade route in place. What kind of goods were worth that incredibly difficult journey?
The network specialized in what they called articles of great value and small bulk. High-quality goods for small caravans. Tibet exported wool and yak tails, and they imported Indian cotton, metalware, and silk.
So the route was working on a local level. Why did the big imperial dream, the shortest route between India and China, why did it fail after a century of trying?
It was a multifaceted failure. First, the Chinese government, the king, feared losing their lucrative brick tea trade with Tibet. It was a huge source of revenue and political influence. So they blocked any survey that might introduce cheaper Assam tea.
And the Tibetans themselves?
The lamas in Tibet were deeply worried about Christian conversion and imperial influence. So they blocked access, they stonewalled negotiations. They saw it as a cultural and religious threat.
And the third reason was a shift in imperial focus.
Exactly. In 1885, the British annexed northern Burma. This diverted all that crucial imperial attention, capital, and engineering effort away from the Brahmaputra and onto the Irrawaddy corridor, which they wrongly thought would be easier. The Brahmaputra project was just abandoned.
But even with that high-level failure, local agency kept the headwaters buzzing. How did the Abors, the Adi, manage their routed mobility?
The Adi were masters of controlling the flow. They controlled the key river networks, the Dihong and Dibong, to secure their habitat and their valuable trade. They weren't reclusive, they were active traders, but on their own terms.
What were they trading?
They exchanged local goods like cotton, opium, and medicinal aconite with Tibetans for Chinese ornaments, salt, and yaks. They inserted themselves right into the transregional market while staying politically sovereign.
This commenting vibe must have created an astonishing cultural mix-up there.
It was a dizzying cosmopolitanism. Sirajganj had its mix of traders, but the remote upper reaches had Abors, Mishmis, Kampas, Bengalis, all traveling together. There's a famous story of one colonial official's expedition needing 10 interpreters who collectively spoke 15 different languages just to get by.
10 interpreters for 15 languages.
That single statistic just perfectly shows the commenting vibe. No single language or imperial structure could dominate that fluid local reality.
Okay, let's shift now to the Irrawaddy, the next great hope after the Brahmaputra failed.
That's right. A geographer named Henry Cadell, he compared it favorably to the Mississippi, the Nile, the Ganga. He said it had a little, if not very much, of each of the good qualities of a great river. He was sure it would define Myanmar's future.
And what made it so strategically promising for the British?
Its northern reach was incredibly close to India. The Mali tributary of the Irrawaddy is separated from the Brahmaputra's dying tributary by just a single pass, the Chakan Pass.
So you could literally walk from one river basin to the next.
You could. The Irrawaddy seemed like a seamless extension of the Brahmaputra system. It was hugely desirable.
And the nodal points along the river saw this explosive economic development after the Anglo-Burmese Wars.
It was rapid and driven by resource extraction. Yananyang became a hot spot for oil. Production jumped from about 60,000 barrels in 1888 to over 6 million barrels by 1898.
6 million.
But the truly critical junction for the transregional flow was Bamo. The Chinese called it Jiangtucheng, riverhead town.
Why was Bamo so critical?
It's 1,000 miles north of Rangoon, the highest navigable point near the Chinese frontier. It was the terminus for the entire land-based supply chain from Yunnan.
So that's where the boats met the caravans.
Precisely. Once the rainy season ended, Bamo just came alive. You'd see innumerable strings of mules, bullocks, and ponies arriving from Yunnan, bringing silk, gold, spices. The return cargo was Indian cotton, wool, British calico.
And how does the story of the Irrawaddy Flotilla Company, the IFC, show the limits of imperial control here?
It's a perfect example of imperial hubris meeting local resilience. The IFC was profitable, sure, but it completely failed to get a monopoly on transport. It could only carry about half the salt needed, and it struggled to keep up with the rice demand in the delta.
So the local boats were still dominant.
Completely. The IFC's fleet was tiny compared to the existing system. You had something like 25,000 local boats that continued to dominate transport, often moving paddy cheaper and more efficiently than the big IFC steam flats.
And that imperial control proved to be very fragile in the end.
It's starkly fragile. During World War II, the British feared the Japanese would use the river for their advance, so they ordered the vast majority of the IFC's fleet, 600 ships, flats, and steamers, to be scuttled, sunk. They just rendered the river unusable. It was a physical admission of how superficial their control really was.
Meanwhile, the local powers, like the Kachins, were using all this to their advantage, right?
Absolutely. The Chinese court was terrified of losing influence, comparing the British to a fast-growing people tree, impossible to eradicate. But the Kachins and the highlands were masters of strategic negotiation. They used hostility, raiding, as a bargaining chip to regain access to Bamo's trade. That rooted mobility again.
And later on, they became indispensable to the imperial powers themselves.
They did. During the war with Japan, the Anglo-Chinese alliance found they were utterly dependent on the Kachins and the Shans. They were absolutely necessary for communications and logistics, partly because they were the only ones relatively immune to the deadly malaria that was wiping out Chinese and British troops in the valley. The local people were literally adapted to the geography in a way the empires weren't. It gave them huge leverage.
And Bamo itself, this riverhead town, became a cultural marvel.
It was a spectacle. One observer called her a wonderful mixture of types. You had British officials, Chinese traders, Shans, Sikhs, Arabs, German Jews, French adventurers, all living in this cheerful promiscuity. It had a double life, quiet in the rains, vibrant in the dry season. A cosmopolitan commons, completely outside the rigid logic of colonial bureaucracy.
Okay, on to the third river, the Salween. This one has a fearful nickname, Nujiang.
The Angry River.
If the Irrawaddy was the commerce corridor, the Salween was pure defiance.
The constraints were almost total. Out of more than 3,000 kilometers, only about 100 near the coast were considered navigable. It was full of Niagara-like falls, currents as swift as a mill race, deep in these gorges. One engineer called the region a chopping sea of hills.
So, unsurprisingly, imperial attempts to use it as a trade route just failed.
Completely and consistently. British engineers were desperate to block the French and Russians, so they argued for a Salween route from Moulmein to Chiang Mai. They said it was a quarter the distance of the Rangoon-Bamo route.
But it was a non-starter.
The only thing they could really manage was some uncertain timber extraction, floating logs down to Moulmein. Nature, far from being an ally, was a total roadblock to their dreams.
And the cost of just being in that territory was incredibly high for outsiders because of malaria.
The Salween Valley was notoriously lethal. There was a Chinese saying, "Before going down to Tangyan, you should marry off your wife to another man."
A warning of near-certain death.
Exactly. And this health hazard gave a huge strategic advantage to the local groups.
So how did the Shans and the Karens use this deadly environment?
They leveraged it perfectly. The Shans controlled the major land networks connecting the Irrawaddy and Mekong systems, and crucially, they were relatively immune to the malaria. This made them the dominant traders. Meanwhile, the Karens controlled the smaller streams, working as coolies with this incredible localized knowledge and strength.
How strong.
They could carry 70 pounds of goods over the steepest, most precarious hills where no infrastructure could ever reach.
And that resilience also meant active resistance to things like the teak trade.
That's right. When the British tried to accelerate teak extraction, local leaders who resisted were just branded as dacoits, as robbers. It was an attempt to turn complex political and ecological resistance into simple crime.
And what did the Salween's mouth, Moulmein, look like?
Moulmein was a microcosm of global trade. Its population was this incredible consortium: Thailand, Karen, Burman, Chinese. The records even list 11 Moguls and 3 German Jews. Festivals there combined piety with business, attracting a sea of humanity. Shans, Chinese, Pelongs, and a medley of global goods. Silk from Japan, toys from Germany, cotton from Manchester. Even the angry river at its coast was deeply integrated into the world system.
Let's move to the two rivers whose contrasting stories really highlight the imperial challenge, the Mekong and the Red River.
The Mekong was a huge disappointment for the French. They hoped it would be the Mississippi of their Southeast Asian empire.
A huge conduit pipe connecting China to the sea.
That's what one explorer called it. But with all the rapids and falls, it was quickly declared an almost useless trade route. The French just gave up and pivoted elsewhere.
But even the useless Mekong was still connected by the local system.
It was, through key nodal points like Samao in Yunnan. Samao was a crucial entrepot famous for pure tea. It was located 40 miles from the Mekong, but it was accessible to the Salween and, most importantly, the Red River routes. It was a primary crossroads for the mule caravans.
So in stark contrast, the Red River, the Yuanchang, the original river, was a huge success.
It was highly effective because of its geography. It offered a much shorter route from Yunnan to the Gulf of Tonkin to Haiphong and Hanoi. It was the quickest path to the sea. After 1885, it created a genuine commercial revolution, pulling trade away from the other systems.
And Manhao was the key point.
Manhao was the last navigable point, serviced by these small 50-foot junks that could carry up to 10,000 pounds of cargo.
And what was flowing along this artery?
It imported goods like Indian and Japanese cotton yarn, tin, copper, opium, all flowing upstream into Yunnan and as far as Sichuan and the Yangzi Valley. The rise of cheaper Indian yarn, in particular, just wiped out the Manchester product in western China.
But securing this lucrative highway was a real struggle for the French.
An intense struggle. They faced these very strong, organized local forces, notably the Black Flags and the Yellow Flags.
Who took control of strategic choke points?
They took Laogai, the headwaters. It took the French a decade of warfare and a 2.5 million franc flotilla just to subdue Laogai. And even then, the evidence suggests the French had to cut a deal with the Black Flags to guarantee safe passage. The impossibility of full imperial control was a constant theme.
Finally, let's turn to the longest river, the Yangzi, which presented its own extreme challenges.
It did. And the critical choke point for the flows we're discussing was the tract from Yuchang to Chongqing. It's famous for its rough rapids and gorges, Witch's Gorge, ox liver.
And yet it was the primary collector and distributor to Western China.
Exactly. Chongqing, despite being so far upstream and facing these enormous logistical hurdles, became a major urban center. It defied all the theories that said economic hubs had to be easy to access.
And since the river was so untamable, the economy must have been powered by something other than modern tech.
It was a human engine, pure physical labor. The vast majority of transport relied on traditional junks. As late as 1913, Chongqing saw over 770 chartered junks with a total tonnage that just dwarfed the 13 steamships that were there.
So local junks, guided by trackers hauling them over violent rapids.
With immense synchronized physical force.
And this brings us to the trackers' songs, the Haozi. They weren't just for rhythm, were they?
No. This is where the river's power meets local genius. The Haozis were much more than just work songs. They were a sophisticated, real-time mnemonic practice.
A mnemonic practice.
The songs would literally list the river's characteristics, its hazards, its difficult spots. They organized the chaotic reality of the river and brought it under the boatman's mental control. The rapids themselves had these visceral names: Yellow Cat, Ox Liver, Horse's Lungs.
So control wasn't achieved with maps and engineering, but with shared cultural practice. The human body and shared memory were the real technology of navigation.
That's it, exactly. And this local system was so effective that the Chinese government could use it as a strategic weapon against the British.
How did they do that?
They played a highly effective game of deliberate procrastination. There's the example of Archibald Little's steamer, the Cooling, which was specifically designed for the rapids. The Chinese authorities just blocked its entry into Chongqing Harbor and eventually forced Little to sell it to them for 3 times what it cost to build.
So they successfully delayed steam shipping for years.
They did. Strategic administrative resistance was just as effective as geographical constraint. And even local political movements like the Taiping Rebellion staked their fortunes at the commercial crossroads of the Yangtze. They saw the river as a living creature, a serpent. They understood its power.
Okay, we've established the rivers were these ruthless levelers, but there's a contradiction at the heart of the Bismarck system. In Yunnan, The rivers get closer, but the terrain becomes this sea of rugged mountains. Navigability drops to zero. So how did the flow continue?
That is the essential question. The water stops being the highway. The continuous flow, the thing that maintained the integrity of the Bizamar Commons. It continued because of what the sources call the organic bridge.
The mule.
The mule, the silent partner in this massive transregional economy. They were the true logistical engine. The ships on this sea of rugged mountains. They were essential for bridging the unnavigable gaps.
And where did this crucial animal agency concentrate?
Mule breeding and trade focused intensely right near the riverbanks, exactly where river trade ended. Yeah, these mule hotspots around the upper Irrawaddy, Salween, Mekong, Yangzi, and the Red River. The caravans followed the contours of the unnavigable parts of the rivers.
And the scale of this mobility must have been immense to support all that trade.
It was enormous, and it grew exponentially with demand. On the Burma-Yunnan Road alone, the number of mules went from about 9,000 in 1902 to nearly 60,000 in 1930.
60,000 mules.
This organic, animal-powered infrastructure sustained the flow where the expensive imperial railways just stalled or failed completely.
Put that into the geographical context. How did mules tie the river nodes together?
They were the connective tissue. Take Dali, a major city in Yunnan. From Dali, it was a 40-day mule journey to Yibin on the Yangzi, 26 days to Manhao on the Red River, and 22 days to Bamo on the Irrawaddy. Mules ensured goods could move efficiently between these river basins.
And the mule was just better suited for this terrain than any other animal?
Far superior. Better than slow elephants, more sure-footed than oxen. Mules could handle the freezing cold at high altitude and the heat in the valleys. They had endurance, sure-footedness, docility, and intelligence.
And it could swim rivers.
Readily. They were proven to climb and descend mountains sturdily in single file, and they'd often have to jump out of high-sided ferry boats to cross fast-moving water.
This sounds like more than just using a beast of burden. It sounds like a deep cohabitation between humans and animals.
It was a deep, professionalized bond. Mules were often considered companion animals. The care was meticulous. Chinese and Tibetan pack saddles were designed with raised arches to protect the mule's spine.
And the caravan routes themselves were built around the mule's needs.
The specialized inns, the matian, prioritized food and accommodation for the animals. Human facilities were often basic. The mule was the asset. Its welfare was paramount.
And who were the human experts in this logistical network?
The Hui Muslim muleteers were dominant. They often charged less, facilitating commerce across these wide, difficult basins. Their movements reinforced the connections, selling surplus mules in Mandalay, reloading with cotton, and returning to the Shan states. This human-animal collaboration defied the topographical divides that frustrated the big imperial projects.
So this historical narrative of the fluvial commons, it comes to a very sharp end with the decline of empire and the arrival of the modern post-colonial state.
It does. And what's crucial is that these new states, armed with centralized tech and capital, they attempted exactly what the empires couldn't, achieving total centralized control over nature.
And that's a major ideological shift, right?
Yeah.
Rivers go from being these negotiated shared commons to sovereign resources to be exploited for national gain.
Absolutely. The post-colonial era kicks off this comprehensive process of decommunization. The securitization of borders means rivers, which were once open spaces for flow, become hard, fixed boundaries. They become utilities for the nation-state.
And this ambition for control has given rise to these monumental existential threats, what some critics call zombie projects.
Because they rise from the grave of failed imperial dreams, only now they're powered by state capital. And the threats are systemic and severe. The most immediate one is massive damming. Across the Bizamari countries, there are nearly 1,000 large hydroelectric dams.
1,000?
And that's not counting several thousand smaller ones. And many of these huge structures are deliberately built on active tectonic fault lines where the gorges offer the best sites for dams.
Which raises a huge question about seismic risk.
It raises terrifying questions. The Three Gorges Dam in China is the most cited example. Studies show a direct correlation between the massive weight of the reservoir and subsequent seismic activity. Between 2003 and 2009, the filling correlated with a 30-fold increase in seismicity, resulting in over 34,000 minor quakes. This massive human interference risks triggering a major earthquake that could literally alter the landscape of fluvial Asia. The hubris is shaking the ground beneath us.
And beyond damming, there's massive water diversion, the ultimate expression of the river as just a resource.
This is the kind of large-scale hydraulic exploitation that the region was previously spared. Now you have India's staggering $250 billion national river linking project aimed at diverting water from the Ganga and Brahmaputra.
And China's plans are even bolder.
The $63 billion South-North Water Diversion Project, designed to move 45 billion cubic meters of water a year from the Sanpo, Yangzi, and Han rivers to its dry northern provinces. It's an unprecedented national manipulation of the entire system.
These modern geopolitical schemes, they seem less interested in using the rivers and more interested in just subduing them.
That's the key difference. Modern infrastructure, China's Belt and Road, India's Look East policy. It focuses on overcoming the rivers. A high-speed railway line between Yuchang and Wanzhou runs 74% through tunnels and bridges. The money is spent not on engaging with the river, but on conquering it.
Let's look at a specific example of this decommunization, the Brahmaputra.
The Brahmaputra is a clear picture. Independent India adopted the colonial idea that excess water was flowing into what is now Bangladesh. This led to the Farakka barrage on the Ganga, which diverted water and caused catastrophic ecological decline in Bangladesh.
And they refused to share other rivers.
India still refuses to share the Teesta River water, damming it for its own use. The shared flow has been replaced by national scarcity and cross-border conflict.
And the Irrawaddy, which was a symbol of local resilience, is facing a similar fate at its crucial confluence.
The Mali and Mai confluence, a Sangama vital to local culture, is now the site of the Mekong Dam. And the tragic irony is that the powers that once competed for control of the free-flowing River China and the Myanmar government are now collaborating to build these dams, displacing locals and prioritizing resource extraction over common welfare.
So the competition has ended, replaced by unified, state-led exploitation.
Exactly.
This has been an incredibly detailed deep dive. We've traced how this massive Bismarck network was never truly controlled by a single imperial power.
That is the indelible lesson of that era. Geography, combined with these powerful fluid networks of local groups, smugglers, and the indispensable mule, they ensured that mobility was constant and power was always negotiated.
The pre-national fluvial commons was co-created by friction and negotiation. It was a shared functional space born of necessity.
It was, and the memory of that commoning process where mobility transcended ethnic divides, where boatmen sang songs to navigate chaos, where the welfare of mules was prioritized, is a powerful challenge to our current reality.
It challenges the modern idea of rivers as just resources to be engineered.
Right. The Rivers Agency was at its best when it assembled conflicting forces and promoted a common ground.
So what does this rich history mean for us now, living in this river Anthropocene?
I think the fate of these rivers is tied to how we see them. Instead of viewing them as national resources to be subdued, we need to reclaim the memory of the river as a common, shared public space. We need to remember the connections, not the boundaries.
That brings us back to Emerson, who had a powerful idea about the true use of a river.
He wrote, "Not only the channel, but both banks of every river should be a public highway. It's not the only use of a river to float on it."
Its true value is in facilitating public life, conversation, mobility, to be a truly public space.
That's the challenge to modern state ambition.
So what happens when we view the snow on the Tibetan mountain cap and the silt in the delta, not as separate national assets, but as one connected common ecological manifestation? Reclaiming that memory of collaboration and negotiation might just be the key to learning how to navigate the rising tide of our engineered world.